Welcome to High Stakes. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Tom Charman, the co-founder of Blok. Tom, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's good to have you here. Tell us a bit about Blok. What should the viewers know about Blok?
For sure. We are building a simulator for product teams. So the view that we have is we're moving towards a world where it becomes faster and cheaper to build, but the ability to answer the question of should we be building the things that we're thinking about building is becoming more difficult than ever. What we do is we help our customers deeply understand their customers, and we build agents that can represent those customers so that when you're building new features, you can ship them and you can see in a simulated environment how customers are going to behave before you've shipped the thing live to real customers. Stops you upsetting real customers, allows you to understand in a fraction of a time whether something is worth building. And most importantly, as we move towards a world which we believe will happen, which is towards adaptive user interfaces, it gives you the ability to have synthetic data to help you make the right decisions at the same speed that engineers are building.
So can you tell us about how does this work right now? So someone wants to use Blok in practice. What would they do? What would they experience? How would it be different from testing with real humans?
Really, the first thing that we do for them is we build up personas. So these personas represent different segments of customers that exist within their customer base today. Once we've built them out, typically what we do is we do some backtesting to identify whether we are right or wrong about predictions that we're making. The most important thing here, right, is being able to trust the synthetic results. And where we've been doing that, we're seeing an 87% fidelity. That means 9 in 10 times we're doing a pretty good job at predicting how humans are going to behave. Once those personas are built, really it kind of comes down to running experiments. So you could have anything from a Figma prototype to a mobile application to a website. You take the link, you basically outline the hypothesis and the thing that you're looking to test. So it could be, can my users easily sign up? Are there any bugs? Are there any areas of friction? And then we have our own agents, which will then interact directly with the flow and step by step give us a breakdown of what's working, what's not working, and where we can improve things against all of the experiments that we're running, but also against the kind of norms and uncertainties of the real world, essentially.
Do you think that this way of testing with those personas, do you imagine a future where this becomes a go-to way of testing with those personas instead of testing with real humans?
It depends how the world evolves. I think humans have to be involved. We're not saying replace humans completely. But I think one of the problems that you have, particularly for user research, is being able to access niche customers, being able to scale out the research. It's becoming more and more difficult in a world where engineers are just building so quickly. So, engineers want an answer yesterday, and you as a researcher are going to spend 12 to 16 weeks doing a study to work out whether essentially the thing that you think is going to happen actually happens. I think the other thing that we're seeing happening in the market is we're moving towards a world of adaptive user interfaces. So getting to the point where your version of Uber and mine might be slightly differentiated based on the way that you and I interact with the product. Now, the way in which we've been building products has kind of been the same since 2005 when Meta invented static. It's reactive. It's design something, build it, put it to real people, see how they behave, make iterative changes, and then complete the cycle again. Thanks to synthetic users and simulation more generally, we're now in a position where we can speed up the rate at which we're running experiments, which is incredibly important from a builder point of view. But at the same time, you can test far wider audience sets, which give you the ability to get closer to that adaptive world. If we do genuinely move towards adaptive user interfaces, the amount of data that you would need to get to stat-sig is going to be unattainable for 99.9% of companies. So simulation will be the default way of being able to do that for the other, the 99.9% of companies where they can't use traditional experimentation methods. Basically moving from reactive to proactive experimentation.
And to be very clear, what we're talking about here is that I can put together a prototype and use Blok and literally this prototype will be interacted with like a person would do. Can you tell us how is this way of testing different from platforms like synthetic users, for example? Is it similar? Is it different? If different, how?
Most people right now are taking a bit more of a kind of top-down approach, which is, kind of building out a synthetic population of people and then asking them a question. Kind of it's how will my onboarding flow behave, etc. It's kind of the way that we've been doing user research as well, is speak to a customer, ask them a question and see how they behave. The problem I've always had with that space, generally speaking, is it's very much people telling you what they think as opposed to what they do. And we all know that humans will tell you what you want to hear as opposed to kind of how they would actually behave. And the same is true of LLMs, right? Every LLM that we use is basically trained to be nice to us. And we can prompt it to be nasty to us, but at the end of the day, like prompt engineering on top of personas doesn't work particularly well because the personas break down very quickly. The approach that we're taking is much more of a bottom-up one. It's being able to have agents that are directly interfacing with the product, showing us step by step, not just how they're behaving, but how they're feeling as well. And then using that information to basically work out where the areas of friction are, where the areas of concern are, drop off, etc. So really the kind of big difference is a top-down versus bottom-up approach. And it's less of a research study and more of actually having people interact or agents interact with the product and show us what's happening in real time.
What I wanted to ask you about as well is how long does it take? Because with humans, it takes a while. I mean, I'm a product manager. I've done that in the past. It takes sometimes days. With a tool like that, what timelines are we talking about?
It depends how complex the experiment is. We can run pretty much an endless experiment. There's no issue with how long the experiment can run, which again, when you look at other platforms, one of the problems is the persona tends to break down depending on the number of steps that it's taking through a flow. I would say the average experiment at the moment is taking somewhere within the realms of 15 to 20 minutes to complete. Now, obviously, if you scale up the number of agents that are running through the platform, it's going to take slightly longer. But yeah, on average, 15 to 20 minutes.
15 to 20 minutes. And are there any specific types of companies that are more suitable for using this way of testing? Or how do you see that? Who's the best client for these types of tools?
Yeah, so given my background was data science. I used to work for the government where I was largely building models to identify radicalization. Spent a lot of time looking at large human data sets to basically predict behavior in very high-risk environments. As a result, I think, naturally speaking, one of the first areas where we've been spending time is regulated industries. So finance, healthcare, education, insurance, banking, and the wider kind of government play. There are two reasons for this. One is they often don't have access to the same level of data that your traditional SaaS company would have. So they can't use the traditional experimentation methods like StatSig, for example. The second is in these really high risk environments, they can't afford to get something wrong. So the benefit of using us is you're testing on a synthetic audience where it doesn't matter if something goes wrong. So that's kind of like why we've picked up those companies the quickest. But with that said, we're now working with with more than a handful of traditional enterprise SaaS companies that are working with us as well. What I will say across the board is, typically speaking, we're working with large organizations as opposed to mid-stage companies, just because the amount of data needed in order to get a high level of fidelity in how humans are going to behave, you need a good amount of data.
How do you think these types of tools change the way, for example, people like product managers do discovery? How does a new discovery process look like? How does a new validation process look like with tools like these?
I think this is the other thing that we're seeing happening in the industry. It's, I think Mark Andreessen said it. I've heard others say it as well, but it's one of the things that's beginning to happen is we're seeing this collapse of roles where, user researchers suddenly have to build prototypes. Product teams have to be building fully fledged products that work in real environments. Engineers are shipping quicker than ever. Like this single builder role that seems to be kind of falling out the bottom is something where we're spending a lot of time. And I think this single builder role means that you will spend some time talking to real humans and you'll get that kind of initial study. You'll then be able to use synthetic tools to simulate out and kind of extrapolate out the findings that you're getting from real humans. You can then use tools like Claude Code, Cursor, Figma Make, whatever your kind of tool of preference is, to build out that prototype, simulate it, identify any areas of concern, areas of drop-off, work out what actually matters to your users, and then obviously go back to, kind of pass the results across into Jira or to Linear or whatever tooling that you're using from that perspective. Have Claude Code or the engineers build it, do a final QA test and push it live. That whole process can take 1 to 2 days versus the kind of 4 to 6 months that it was taking before.
Much faster than before.
Yeah.
How's this space looking like right now? Because based on what I'm reading, we have this new space that's developing here, right? With synthetic testing and all of that. Can you tell us a bit about the space? How does it look like right now? What are some of the key players? What trends are you seeing?
It's quite early. I think at one end of the spectrum, you've got moderated interviews. So things like Rally, Outset, Listen Labs, who are speeding up the rate at which you can speak to real users by bringing AI into the loop. At the other end of the spectrum, you have companies like Simly, Aru, who are very much focused on the simulation space. And I would say they're more disrupting the consultancies of this world who, it's no surprise that I don't mean to throw shade to McKinsey here, but it's no surprise that when OpenAI was giving out trophies for the amount of tokens that were being spent earlier in the year, McKinsey was, I think, over $1 trillion. So consultants are quickly being replaced by some of this tooling because this tooling is essentially empowering people to do the work that consultants were doing. And in between that, you've got a range of companies, as you say, anything from kind of like synthetic users to us to kind of companies in between. It's an early space. There will be a few kingmakers made. And I think we're spending a lot of time making sure that we have a clear path to becoming the decision infrastructure. That's kind of very much where we're focused, is how do we make sure that as it pertains to building product, we are the company that is helping you kind of make the decisions to understand what to build for who and when.
So let's talk a bit about the future, right? Because right now we are in this early stage, as you said, and we're already seeing these shifts. So what's next? What's like the next 3 to 5 years of this space? What other developments can we expect?
I think there'll be lots of things happening. I think at the moment, obviously a lot of people are using coding tools, as I say, Claude Code, Codex, etc. Now at the moment, they're kind of anything between kind of 60 to 80% accurate. There's still a lot of errors going in place. Now that creates an incredible opportunity from a cybersecurity perspective, being in a position where you can, I hear 3 to 5 times a week friends saying like, how do I secure my agents? How do I make sure that they're not going to get hacked? It's an incredible opportunity that can be built into. I think the kind of, we're going to be building faster. We're going to be shipping quicker. The kind of other question that occurs to me is, as we're burning tokens faster and faster, the cost is going up. We're suddenly realizing that essentially the drug that we've been fed for the last 18 months isn't free and people are going to need to make money. I think the other space that I see exploding is around the small language model space. And we're spending a lot of time right there now. So I'm biased, but we're spending a lot of time digging deep into how can we leverage the same technology and more niche data sets to build out models that can outperform large foundational models within specific tasks. And I think that's really kind of where you get some really interesting stuff beginning to happen.
That's very insightful. I also wonder, because we're talking about AI and also your company, your product is relatively new. And we're seeing a lot of shifts in the industry in terms of how companies work and leverage AI. And I'm curious, how does this look at Blok? How are you leveraging AI internally, and how is it different from what you've seen before?
Yeah, I think so. This is my 4th company. I mean, naturally, like I was building the first wave of artificial intelligence back when it was kind of neural networks and hybrid recommendation systems, and kind of saw the first nuclear winter of AI from that perspective. This one does feel different. I think there's a lot of noise around artificial intelligence at the moment. I think the tasks that it does very well are candidly the repetitive tasks that don't require taste. I think the thing where models are breaking down at the moment is when people are trying to bring taste into the equation. There's ways around it with things like context and memory to kind of give these agents the ability to kind of take on the context of human behavior. But we use it a lot for kind of automating the tasks that we don't want to be doing day to day. I still think you have to have a human in the loop for the most important decisions.
What types of tasks do you typically automate internally? Are you, like, for example, would you say that some roles are no longer needed within the company because you manage to leverage AI to automate them? If yes, what types of roles do you see as being replaced?
Yeah, I think like one of the roles, like, we use our own product for QA testing. We use our own product for usability testing. We still need a UX expert and the kind of specialists that understand the field, but you can kind of, I think it's less about replacing roles entirely and more about replacing the bottom 40, 50, 60% of work that specialists don't want to do so they can focus on the more important tasks. And that's anything from design to QA to wider testing to even marketing and sales as well. Like, it's the mundane tasks that you don't want to be doing day to day can now be replaced so that you can focus on the things that actually matter to drive success of the company.
Right. Let's go back for a second to the actual products, and we're talking a bit about the future. In the past, as a product manager, for example, I have used tools like user testing, right? Where you talk to real humans. How do you think those new tools like Blok, synthetic users, how will that impact these types of tools that product managers used to rely on for doing their work on a day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, I think one of the bets that we're making is that we see, I talk to enterprise companies all the time. And the thing that I keep hearing over and over again is we're having to completely rebuild our product stack. The product stack that we've been using for the last 5, 10, 15 years is completely out of date with the reality of what's available in the market now. And I think, tools A/B testing tools, I don't know where they go. I think there will still be a place for them, but I think the number of companies that use them will decrease, particularly as we move towards adaptive UI. I think tools like feature flagging will become more important because feature flagging will be how do you feature flag agentic stuff, or how do you feature flag different versions of product for different types of people. I think user testing, as I say, there's still going to be a place for human testing, but I think there's going to be an even bigger place for synthetic testing. So it's kind of the goal to go from like that initial study to scaling out to a wider audience of people. And then there's the kind of question mark around analytics. And, kind of analytics is a space that is quickly becoming, it's always been very reactive, even though it's sold itself as being proactive. So they're going to have to change the way that they build if they want to survive in a world where product experimentation does become more proactive. So I think that entire stack, anyone that's been operating in that category is at risk to a new wave of companies that are coming in and trying to move product building from a reactive process to a proactive one.
Which part of this testing space do you think are quite difficult to sort of simulate with AI? Is there anything that's particularly challenging that many players are trying to solve for, but there are no clear answers?
I think like the kind of the biggest question marks around, can you successfully simulate behavior with a high enough fidelity? That's kind of where everyone's spending their time at the moment. It's like, can you successfully get human, like synthetic behavior? Can it really represent human behavior? And as I say, it kind of comes down to the approach that you're taking. I think the top-down approach is difficult to do because you're kind of building out a synthetic population that is broad and generic. I'm making a bet on saying that the bottom-up approach is better, where you can more deeply dig into how different people are going to behave and model out those behaviors at not just a kind of, how they previously behaved within a product, but at a psychometric, emotional, demographic perspective as well. And, the goal there is kind of similar to a few people in the space. It's building out a foundational model that represents human behavior. But I think that's the hardest thing to do. If you can successfully do that, then it's not to say we're ever going to get to Minority Report, but there's a reason that, that's the space where people are spending their time. It's the potential unlock of being able to successfully predict human behavior is enormous.
So speaking of successfully predicting human behavior, I'm curious, what does this mean in practice? Does it mean that companies like yours, for example, need to, let's say, observe how people do things to then include that in the simulation? Tell us a bit more about that. What does this mean?
Yeah, so for us, definitely. I think, we spend a lot of time looking at how people have previously behaved within products. And we then use that to predict how they're likely to behave in the future. We are spending a lot of time digging deep into the different traits and facets of human behavior and how essentially you can train a model to take on those traits and facets. So like a lot of time is being spent there. Yeah, 100%. It means looking at how real humans have behaved, which is why I think that human element is still always going to be there, and using that information to predict how they're likely to behave in the future.
One thing that I wonder about, because we have software, that's one thing, but what about physical products? Does this extend to simulating the usage of physical products? If yes, if you can tell us a bit more, what does it mean in practice?
Yeah, I think this is when we're talking about world models. And I think this is, there are people like Feifei Li and kind of like there are big researchers building in the world model world. Like we've had companies approach us and say like, hey, would you be able to help us design a new helicopter? Or, hey, would you be able to like implement your behavioral models into our humanoid robots so that they can behave more like humans? Like, I think all of that is a bit sci-fi at the moment, but an absolute possibility in the next 3 to 5 years. The difficulty that comes into play when you're looking at world models is you're not just looking at the reason that we like the digital space at the moment is, one, because we've got training data, which allows us to see whether we were right or wrong and show that we can be accurate. Two, it allows us to focus on almost kind of one surface of behavior. Like world models, you need to take into account dexterity with how fingers move. You need to take into account where our eyes are drawn to and the way that we move. So I think that's where things get a little bit more tricky, but I have no doubt that as we move towards the physical world, we will certainly be able to simulate physical environments. We see people doing it all the time. Like the example that I give when I give a presentation is You are not going to, a pilot is not put in a plane the first time that they are driving a plane. Are put into a plane simulator to see whether they can fly the thing. Same with driving, same with heart surgery. Like, we're training on simulated environments in that perspective, and then we take those to the real world. I think the same will be true when it comes to kind of personalizing physical experiences as well in the longer term.
Got it. So it starts with the digital experiences, and then over time we expand to those physical experiences, even as complex experiences as medicine, for example, which
I'd hope so,
requires
yeah.
a lot of testing data. I wonder, how do you see the future for Blok? Like, what is the next big step for Blok?
Yeah, so I think, we've been spending a lot of time building our own models and making sure that we can successfully understand human behavior. Now, simulation is an incredible space to be in. And it's kind of, as cliche as it is to say, the previous companies that I've built have kind of to some extent led up to what we're building today. But I think for me, simulation is not the end game. I think the bigger vision here is, again, going back to adaptive user interfaces and adaptive experiences, be it physical or digital. The thing that is exciting about simulation is you can exponentially scale the work that you're doing to understand essentially how people are going to behave, which then puts you in the driving seat of being able to say that, hey, maybe actually simulation becomes a sandbox environment for adaptive interfaces, adaptive worlds, adaptive experiences, whatever those things are. The goal that I have always had is, it frustrates me that we all use the same version of a product. And yes, content can be personalized. You go into Netflix and what you see and I see will be different from a content perspective, but we should be able to do the same thing with user interfaces. You might prefer text messages, or while I prefer voice notes. So when I get a message from someone on WhatsApp, I should automatically get a voice note, whereas you should have it automatically turned into text. It's things like that, these kind of adaptive, throwaway, generative interfaces that means that we can interface with our technology far better in a much more efficient way. That's the thing that I'm excited about.
Do you think that there are any uses for this technology beyond testing software and physical products? What other uses are there?
Many. We don't just work within products. We work with national security. We work with governments and do some interesting work there. And then it's no surprise, given my background previously, that there's things that we've seen in the past, which I actually advocate against. But, we saw with Cambridge Analytica, the fact that you could simulate a political election and predict who was going to win and then influence that decision making. Again, not supportive of that particularly, but there are so many realms and where this can go, because you basically, you can kind of liken it to a bit of the kind of multiverse, right? It's being able to simulate out lots of different decisions to work out which the optimum is, and then move towards the optimum, in the same way that the multiverse in, the world of Marvel is, what world are you going to be in and how is that going to play out?
That's a very interesting vision for the future. Is it something that Blok is also planning on doing in the future, or is that too different of a space?
We'll see. I think it's naturally something that we're excited about and we spend a lot of time thinking about. But I think for me, it's like, you can only get there if you can successfully model out, you have to start somewhere, which is why we've started where we are. And the goal for us is, let's see how far we can take this, be it physical, be it adaptive UI, be it, multiple scenarios, like whatever that ends up being.
What I also wonder about is, given the nature of the work that you're doing at Blok and the simulations, what is the structure of your team? Like, what types of jobs are needed to make this happen and to help, develop the future of Blok?
Yes, we, unsurprisingly, are very engineering and research heavy. So team is made up of cognitive scientists, behavioral scientists, researchers. Our chief scientist was one of the founding CTO of Benevolent, which used to basically use simulation to predict the outcome of clinical trials before they happened. We have a real range from that perspective, but I'd say it is the focus up until now has very much been engineering and research heavy. And now, as we begin to, most of the customers that we've had up until now have been inbound. We're now beginning to think about an outbound sales motion, which will mean thinking about kind of hiring salespeople and growing out that side of things as well.
Your experience at this, you've launched many companies at this point, but if there's someone newer listening to this, starting out their own business, what advice would you give them?
Probably nothing useful. I think the thing that I always say to people is, just understand your customer. If you don't deeply understand, and if you can't resonate with the customer and what they need, you're never going to build something that sells. And it's one thing to have a nice piece of technology that's searching for a customer, and another thing to have a product that is being used by people. And so I think it always comes down to like spending time with a customer and understanding deeply what they care about.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for hopping on with us today.
No worries.
This was Tom, the co-founder of Blok. Make sure to check out Blok and stay tuned for the next high stakes episode.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom.